BoJack Horseman is the best thing that ever happened. But Schaeferless Productions already made a 6-part long retrospective of the whole show detailing the characters, themes, and giving his opinion on almost everything. Okay, so BoJack is my favorite 2D animated show, but there's still my favorite 3D animated show to talk about, right? Oh wait, he started doing it too. Well, let's go back to 2D. Final Space, my second favorite 2D animated show. It was made by creator Olin Rogers, who wanted to do an epic sci-fi story with a lot of heart. The first time I watched the show, I fell in love with season 1, but then gave up 2 episodes into season 2. The first season was so tightly focused on its narrative that the sudden change to more episodic tales and more jokes didn't really felt like the show. I was like, okay, it's bad now, time to forget about it forever. But someone told me recently that season 2 and especially season 3 were actually pretty great, but that we would never get the end of the story because the show got cancelled. This really piqued my interest because I obviously hate it when a story is unable to reach its intended conclusion, and I wanted to support it. So I watched the whole thing, and one day later, Olin announces that he made a deal to save the show in the form of a graphic novel. Since then, I've rewatched the show another time with my sister, and I want to take a look back at the 3 seasons we got and give my opinion on them. I thought that going episode by episode like Schaeferless's BoJack videos would be a little too much for this show, so I opted for a different approach. I'm doing the same thing he did with Gravity Falls. I'm gonna rank every episode! Nailed it! So full spoilers if you haven't seen Final Space, and in this case, go watch it immediately. Let's go!
Disappointment in the game of life!
Oh, The Lost Spy. Even Olin Rogers himself wrote that it was his least favorite episode of season 2, and I think it's for a good reason. This is a filler, like there's only 3 scenes of value, and they're the ones about the titular Lost Spy. The story with Cheryl and Todd is really interesting, as we see her backstory being explained in a cool way, but again, it's only 3 scenes, and it's hard to focus on them when the rest of the episode is a random, unfunny Clarence misadventure and a boring search for Little Cato that has no tension because you obviously know that they will find him by the end. These 2 plotlines have some good jokes, but they add nothing to the rest of the show and could be cut without anything changing. The way to solve this problem, in my opinion, would have been to let Gary heal alone for the whole episode, while the squad actually searches for Cheryl to get the dimensional keys back. Then it wouldn't feel as out of place to learn her backstory in this episode. Apparently, Olin Rogers and his team had a lot of network notes and things that were out of their control while making season 2 in particular. So I don't want to blame the creators at all, they did the best with what they were given. But still, this episode is the worst of the entire show, and I would never rewatch it. Also, I really want to judge the quality of the episode themselves going forward, so if I say bad things about season 2 episodes, you can be sure that I'm also completely aware of why certain choices were made. I understand the context behind most bad writing decisions, and I just don't want to mention that every time since the show is still great and they had no choice.
What kind of frost bear would murder rainbow cookies in cold blood?
The happy place made me stop the show the first time I watched it. Only half of this episode is actually good, which makes it automatically better than The Lost Spy, which only had a third of good content. The humor in this episode is genuinely unbearable. Gary being in a dream and losing his energy is fine, but the time he passes in his dream is way too long. I do ironically love the dance battle with the Lich King because it's pretty epic, but all of this Cookie family and teddy bear nonsense isn't really funny. You could have done the same as Tribor, one scene that establishes what exactly Gary sees in his happy place, and it would have been fine. Speaking of him, I hate that this episode brings back Tribor, obviously, but we'll get to him later. Also, the pissing war scene and the subplot about Clarence selling this place he doesn't own are atrocious, but there are still some good parts, like the backstory and the revenge story of Todd, who lost his family because of the whole Earth getting sucked into Final Space thing, is really interesting, and the action is solid, but overall it really felt like the show was losing the plot and started to become generic episodic adventures that lacked the heart of the first season. So yeah, this episode is like second to last. But still, you can't say it is unmemorable after seeing this.
Now this is pod racing.
The Toro Regatta is a fine episode, but it really rushes the introduction to Season 2. It completely invalidates the end of Season 1 by bringing Gary back to life without any explanation. Then it gives Hugh a robot body, brings back the random side character Clarence that only appeared in one episode of Season 1, introduces his two children Fox and Ash, and also adds little Kato, Kevin with scrap on his face, a new ship, and another AI. All of this in 10 minutes. When a lot of Season 2 episodes are episodic misadventures that advances the plot really slowly, it's jarring to see this many characters and plot points being thrown at your face like this. This whole season has the character retrieve 5 keys to free Bolo, but what if, instead, we could meet a new character every episode to slowly build our squad, so we could take on a final big heist to get the one key we need? It would be kinda like Mass Effect 2, where you see returning faces and newcomers appear in the team along with fun episodic missions. But no, we really needed to rush the introduction to get into these meandering episodes while having no emotional connections to these new characters. The rest of this episode isn't even all that good or memorable, it's just a random uninteresting heist on these ships with a boring villain. The ships themselves and the race are cool looking though, and the Bolo scene at the end, along with the return of Nightfall and Mooncake, are really good. So, not the worst of the whole show, cool!
But it doesn't take me out of the crawl nearly as much as The Dead Speak.
The Dead Speak is a good, random episode of the show. There is actually some important stuff that happens in this episode, and it's good, but we need some filler so the zombie Garys attack the ship. This concept would have been much more impactful if it was the first time we saw the zombie since the Season 3 premiere. Having them all invade the ship would have been tense and cool, but instead the zombies show up in almost all the Season 3 episodes as weak henchmen. It makes this episode stand out less because its concept of zombies is there in the other Season 3 episodes, on top of other sci-fi concepts. So there isn't a lot of tension in the episode when it's focused on zombies, because we've already seen the squad defeat them too many times. But still, the plot-focused moments are incredible in this episode. Bolo's death is really unexpected and sad, the whole team turning on Quinn for her mistake and the alternate Gary's monologue make a point of showing that Quinn is an asshole, and the Infinite Earths reveal is incredible. But when you get to the last episode, you realize that it doesn't matter since the show got cancelled.
Fun! Yeah, that's always good, thanks.
Still, it's the thread that I'm the most eager to see continued in the graphic novel. So yeah, overall, a fine episode that could have been better if the Zombie Garys weren't a recurring group, but it had some amazing moments.
Mabel, our lives may not be worth this.
Friday night, we're gonna party till dawn. Don't worry, Daddy, I've got my favorite dress on. Mabel, this is stupid!
We're rolling to the party, the boys are looking our way. We just keep dancing, we don't care what they say. And all the boys are getting up in my face. Guys, we have to sing together or it won't work.
Boys are a bore, let's show them the door.
We're taking over the dance floor.
Oh, girls do what we like. Oh, we're taking over tonight. Oh, girls do what we like. Oh, we're taking over tonight. We're queens of the disco. Oh, girls do what we like. Oh, we're taking over tonight.
Taking over tonight.
Thank you! We'll be here all night!
That one might have been a little too. My mom's a huge bitch for the room.
The Notorious Mrs. Goodspeed is the second episode of Season 2 where the squad obtains a dimensional key in a random heist involving Clarence. And again, just like in the Toro Regatta, the heist is crammed into the last 10 minutes of the episode. If it was more fleshed out, it could have been great, but sadly it's just okay. Clarence is also at his most unfunny and cringe, being extremely horny the entire time. Also, there's a subplot about Mooncake eating too many delicious pancakes and becoming fat. Whatever. Where this episode shines is with the introduction to Cheryl, a really interesting and funny character that never really got enough development. The ending of this episode is super sad and cool, with a flashback to Gary being essentially alone when his mom left after his dad died, accompanied by really great sad music and striking black and white imagery. So yeah, Clarence bad, Cheryl good, moving on.
You wrote a 100-page essay, and then you boil it down to a small haiku.
Fuck you, Mom.
Yo, dudes, for the freshest boards in the galaxy, check out the new XZ88 from Gadgetron. It's so hot, it's cool.
The setup almost made me tolerate Clarence. It's kind of funny how much the creators seem to like him in Season 2, since he only has one appearance in each of the other 2 seasons. In Season 2, he's there in every episode up to this one, in which he betrays the team and they leave him there because why would they continue to bring him along if he is unhelpful and annoying? If the writers wanted to make us feel sad for him, they should have planted the seeds for that way earlier than here, because it just makes him look like an idiot by trusting Cheryl and thinking that they'll be in love. Because, no. And I almost started to tolerate him as a hateable villain when he was revealed to be a snake rat, because at least it meant that the writers were aware of how unlikable he was for this entire season, and they were just straight up making him a bad guy. But no, apparently he was in a flying ant skin suit, a snake skin suit, and a skin suit of himself this entire time. And then he tries to make us feel bad because nobody likes him. Newsflash, you've been an asshole to everybody. Everyone on the team is nice and likable except you. If you don't have any friends, that was your mistake. Anyway, this episode is good outside of that.
Danny kind of forgot about the Iron Fleet and...
Oh my god, the team squad is so dumb in Until the Sky Falls. They clearly see that the Lord Commander is headed for the center of the planet, and that there are earthquakes everywhere, which means the Earth will implode anytime now. Then, they learn that the Titan is actually in the center of the Earth, where they were already headed to kill the Lord Commander. Okay. And their master plan involves creating a link between thousands of robots around the Earth to create a shield that also has enough firepower to kill Titans. I would question the logic of making a shield around a planet that is self-destructing at the exact same moment, but let's accept it. Kevin Van Newton says to kill the Titan using the bomb so he doesn't hatch, which is fine, but they attach the bomb to the Lord Commander's ship? I guess they thought it would detonate close to the Titan, killing them both, but then we see the Lord Commander possessing the Titan, hatching and being unaffected by the explosion, which makes the other plotline about activating the Kevin net pointless, since it is destroyed immediately by the now giant Lord Commander. The characters have already seen the Lord Commander use his possessing ability and the fact that he can also breathe in space and levitate in Season 1. So did they just forget and assume he wouldn't be able to reach the Titan before the bomb explodes? Why couldn't they just blow the Titan directly, which would leave the Lord Commander unable to grow big, stabilize the planet because the Titan isn't hatching anymore, and make it so the Kevin net would stay there? You might say that they can't launch the bomb on the Titan because the Lord Commander is blocking the way in the tunnel and needs to drill before them so they can progress, but we've seen that they also have a drill on their ship, and that they are able to lightfold into the core of a sun. So why couldn't they just do that? They would get to the core faster and actually blow up the Titan. Sure, the ship couldn't get out of there, and it means somebody would need to sacrifice himself, but Kevin Van Newton was already willing to sacrifice himself in this episode. If he went to the core and stopped the Titan from hatching, the planet would be stable and everybody could activate the Kevin net underground, since the only danger now would be the zombie Garys that the team can take out with ease if they fight together. I'm sorry for that, I guess the characters had no choice. They just didn't think of this plan. Anyway, if you ignore the logic behind the plot and just take the story in a vacuum, there is a lot of good stuff in this episode. Kevin Van Newton's sacrifice is pretty sad. The Lord Commander looks sick as a Titan and ramps up the tension for the following episodes, and Gary and Quinn's Wisconsin misadventure is enjoyable even though the Kevin net was ultimately pointless.
Hey, a laser! How come you don't have a laser, Woody?
Cracks in the Stars is the weakest Season 1 episode. Not bad, but the jokes don't always land and it feels a little fillery. In itself, this episode has two purposes. The characters need to learn that the Infinity Guard is working on a laser for the Lord Commander, and the writers need to flesh out the dynamic between Gary and Quinn. This episode does these things very well, but the Kevin scenes are probably the most cringe in the show, and Superior Stone is a pretty boring villain. He gets defeated by the Rift Inducer gun from Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal. I find that cool, but in the context of the show, we've never seen weapons do this, and it kinda comes out of nowhere. These are my only two criticisms, as this episode is still a fun time in this space jungle. I like it.
I'm Old Man McGucket!
The Hidden Light is the reintroduction to these characters for Season 3, and it's really good. But wait, you might be thinking, this is the second episode of the season, why isn't the first one of the season the introduction one? And I want to say that End Into the Fire is a lot more focused on resolving the cliffhanger from the last season and being a bombastic opener. This one is much slower, as we see each member of the team's personality shine for a moment while they're talking to this new batch of the awesome Arachnitechs. It reintroduces us to their dynamic after the last combat-heavy episode really well. On Earth, Gary and Quinn are finally able to spend some time together. Hugh fulfills his dream of visiting Paris in a physical form, and Kevin meets an army of himself. That's neat! We also get introduced to Biscuit, a character I like on paper, but hate in execution because of the voice Olin Rogers does for him. It's like Tribor, but worse!
The last thing I knew, I was saving the world. Oh boy! It's you! It's you!
The fact that he received Gary's videos speeds up the phase where he needs to trust the team, since he knows Gary and Quinn really well, and makes this plot point from Season 1 retroactively much more important.
When you're this far out in space, most of that stuff gets lost.
Liar!
The Lord Commander makes his awaited return and is as fun to watch as ever, and we also meet the creator of the Kevins. He's a character that I found unnecessary at first, but I realized over time how much he helped everyone in the team this season. He conceived the portal that will make them escape from final space, he gives them a new Infinity Guard ship that's called the Galaxy 2 as an awesome callback to Season 1, and eventually tells the team the way to stop final space poisoning when they need to save Quinn. Yeah, he's rude, but he reminded me a lot of Merlin from Trollhunters, this annoying old man that gives the cast important items for plot progressions, and eventually sacrifices himself in a way that makes you care. Yeah, Merlin's death is among the rare story choices from Wizard that I like, but that's a story for another day. The bottom line is, this episode is really good. The only problem I have is that some of the jokes sucks, but hey, it's not as bad as The Lost Spy, so I can complain.
Time travel! I see this as an absolute win.
Nightfall is a good episode. It shows us the first version of, well, Nightfall's backstory before Season 2 retcons it for something better. And we get a glimpse at an older version of Little Cato. I wonder where that's leading. Outside of that, there isn't a lot of memorable stuff in this episode. Everyone just kinda wanders around, being sad that Avocado died, and the time travel stuff isn't the worst time travel I've ever seen, so that's good. It's just weird that the show later introduces two other ways to time travel outside of Nightfall's machine. So I hope that they say in the graphic novel that she created the machine using either those time shards or the space worms. It would help unify the lore of the show.
I know that's a whole lot of holes, but we're in a whole lot of trouble.
Order of the 12 is a great episode. The best part is when Gary and Avocado are trapped in this maze that creates anything. It's really funny and creative. The visuals of this planet are great overall, and the design of the creatures that Mooncake fight are really cool. It's also the first time we get proper development for the Lord Commander. We learn that he's actually dying and that he might have a deeper motivation than wanting to rule everything. Ultimately, that's not the case, and he just wants to become a Titan and rule every dimension. But he's such an entertaining villain that I don't mind the fact that he's so standard. I also like the ending of the episode because it means the show won't drag out the arrival of Quinn into the story any longer. And Steve-O is the most likable good guy I've ever seen. He deserves your trust.
This is Fox Deterrent.
Yeah, that's safe to have that.
This is Fox Repellent.
Okay, the Deterrent and the Repellent.
I think that the middle of Season 3 was the right time for the show to do a slower episode focused on the characters dealing with their past. Forgiveness is hard to watch because you're so invested in Gary and Avocado's friendship that seeing them hurt each other in a fight is simply heartbreaking. Little Cado's two dads are fighting each other while his actual parents are dead. It's so sad for him, oh my god. I also really like Ash meeting the thing from Strange World that takes the form of her sister. Everyone on the team is grieving someone and it's harder for some of them to move past it. I really thought that Evra was gonna be a twist villain, but no, she's just a supportive character, and I like that, despite feeling that she's primarily a setup for the next season, which we now know won't happen.
Fun! Yeah, that's always good, thanks.
I would really like her to return in the graphic novel, because it could be a great way to turn Ash back into the light. This episode is great, but the only problem I have with it is that getting a moment with Gary and Ash at the end was sweet, but it kinda makes the part in a few episodes when she turns back on the team make a little less sense. There, she gets mad about Fox's death all over again, and it invalidates that scene, which made things right between her and Gary. That's just a little unsatisfying.
No.
Oh, no.
It's not going to be quick.
Can you get to it already?
I am! Get ready to...
Get ready to what?
I didn't quite hear that last part, but it sounded important.
What?
And together you and I can rule the galaxy. Make things the way we want them to be.
Why do the main characters lose at the end of the show? Because Ash just happened to walk by as they talked about the people they murdered. That's convenient. Anyway, The Leaving is a great episode. The point of it is for Little Cado to learn about his parents' death, and Ash turning fully evil. Like I said, I do think that her turning evil undermines the scene when she forgave Gary in the episode literally called Forgiveness, but her fall to the dark side is pretty well justified within the story. Also, out of nowhere, this episode decides to pay off the satellites that Gary was building in the background in Season 1. I don't know why they did that, but it sure is satisfying, and it really makes you wonder about all the little details from the earlier season that would have been paid off in Season 4.
Fun!
The situation in this episode is more dire than ever, and it leads perfectly into the now series finale.
Claire! You're not doing this alone!
Change is Gonna Come would be ranked a lot higher than this, but Tribor brings it down. 2/3 of the plot lines in this episode are still great. The squad teaming up to save Quinn and Gary having to share her pain is really emotional and well done. Invictus starting to convince Ash is also really interesting to watch. The colors and backgrounds in this episode are absolutely amazing sometimes. The only thing I don't like in this episode is Tribor. His quest is boring, unfunny, and has no point. If Holland pays off the random chosen one plot point in the graphic novel, this episode would jump to the top 15 honestly. But as is, Tribor makes it bad. Don't worry, I'll explain in details later why I hate him.
Side characters.
They're like Belushi brothers. The good ones leave too soon and the bad ones never go away.
They never do. Is this peach? Because it better not be fuchsia.
One of Us is a really cool concept for an episode. The team squad being tied up in chains with people around being randomly possessed builds a lot of tension. The Lord Commander is as threatening and powerful as ever, and Gary getting a weaponized arm is really fun! Unless it's not the first time you watch the show and you know where this is going, oh my god! The Tribor plotline is obviously the worst part of the episode, but at least there's an actual cool fight scene montage with him and Quattro Nostro, so it's not the worst Tribor subplot ever. The ending is also really ominous, with Fox being possessed by Invictus. This episode is just really entertaining overall, and there's not many negatives to say about it.
Do you want to build a portal?
Hyper Transdimensional Bridge Rising is the most epic title in animated shows history. And the episode itself? It's some great stuff. Seeing all the one-off characters and recurring villains return just to mess with Clarence is surprisingly cathartic. It's the first time I've felt something other than hatred towards Clarence as well. This episode takes the pieces of a compelling redemption that were placed in the setup and uses them to make a great sacrifice scene that got me a little emotional over Clarence of all people. Todd was also a solid villain in Season 2, and his send-off is perfect. He's just a guy fueled by revenge until the very end, in which he decides to kill Clarence, even after being moved by his words about love. Todd wants Gary dead so bad, it's actually sad. The return of all the different villains and the portal stuff takes a good chunk of the runtime, and the rest of the episode doesn't contain a lot outside of that. I was the happiest man alive when Tribor left, And I also admired the team for trying to stay in final space to fight, even though it ends up being a mistake later.
What happened? The world's worst riddle.
We don't know!
The Grand Surrender is the backstory episode for Ash. It's not all that original or mind-blowing. She was just raised by fanatics that wanted to sacrifice her to a giant snake, which caused her sister to die and Ash to randomly find a new family that happened to be on this exact planet at the same time. Well, okay, looking back, that's actually pretty interesting. Kevin having all the answers to the Gollum riddles that an old man in the belly of a giant snake poses to the team is also one of the funniest bits in Season 2 for me. I'm sorry, okay, I like Kevin. Obviously, I shipped Lil Kado and Ash together the first time I watched the episode, but yeah, Season 3 kinda changed my mind on that, sorry. I really hope the graphic novel will complete Ash's story in a satisfying way, because this character is one of the best additions of Season 2 to the overall show. And also, the wedding subplot is really funny, forgot to mention.
Oh no! Best friend! No! My best friend!
Maybe it was Earth all along.
Return to Earth isn't as good as the 2 episodes that sandwich it. But still, it's important to give the relationship between Gary and Quinn some time, because she's basically absent for Season 2. Tribor is back, so that sucks. Kevin has a mech suit now, so that's pretty epic. The guy that Gary knocked out in the first episode comes back for a joke and it's pretty funny. The guy that Gary knocked out in the first episode comes back for a joke again and it's less funny the second time because it ruins an emotional moment. There's a Matrix reference and I really like Matrix, so that's nice. And the reason this episode is even in the top 20 is for that excellent scene where the whole city is getting sucked into the breach, like in Big Hero 6, and Gary and Quinn are sharing this moment together while they float in the air. It's so great, apart from the awkward joke that I mentioned earlier. Finally, the ending gets you excited for the season finale. A good episode overall with a dope scene.
On Acaridian 5, the 7th kiss makes baby.
And Into the Fire isn't as good as the episode of Babylon 5 that has the same name. I mean, how can you top the climactic ending of the entire Shadow War? It's impossible. Meanwhile, the Final Space version of Into the Fire is still an incredible season premiere. It sets the stage perfectly for Season 3 and its new status quo. The whole team is trapped in Final Space and Bolo goes on his own to begin his quest to kill all Titans. The fight scenes really make you feel how small the characters are. The Titans are literally tearing this little planet apart while fighting, and it leads to the characters being separated in 2 groups underground. Gary and Avocado use their manliness to gain telepathy, which is really funny and heartwarming since it's the first time Avocado is really back since his death in Season 1. Tribor is pregnant for some reason, and I hate it. The scene where they give birth is the most uncomfortable and cringy I felt since the Pissing War. Despite that, Quattro Nostro is a really cool character, and I wish they would just kill Tribor and replace him with Quattro. It's a shame he's only in the pointless Tribor plotline. He's so funny and reminded me of Buzz in Toy Story 3. Also, the Big Giant was a great addition to solidify the urgency of leaving Final Space, after we see him being almost consumed by the poisoning. He would rather die than suffer any longer, and that's a huge change from the goofy tone of Season 2. Going back a bit, this episode establishes the zombie Garys really well, despite making it so they don't have a lot of impact later in The Dead Speak, when they are the only threat, since even in their introduction, they were less compelling than the Titans fighting in the background. Ava's death isn't sad on its own, but I care about Hugh, so his reaction is still a little emotional after his whole plotline in Season 2 revolved around their blossoming romance. I love the new intro as it reminds me of the Respawn animation from Borderlands. This episode has some beautiful backgrounds and shots. The Sea of Dead Garys, the Red Planet, the fields, the caves, and especially the Earth reveal at the end. Yeah, this episode is amazing! Yeah, this episode is amazing! The first time they met gives us the backstory of Nightfall, and it's a lot better than the backstory of Ash 4 episodes ago, since we can anchor this story into what we already know about Quinn from Season 1. With Ash, we had nothing of value, since Clarence never mentioned her in his only Season 1 appearance, and her introduction was really rushed in the Toro Regatta, like I said earlier. We already knew the necessary information about Nightfall in Season 1, but I'm fine with this little retcon of her backstory in Season 2, because it's a lot more compelling and emotional. You know, the stuff this show is good at. And technically, you can reconcile the lore of her losing Gary because of the Lord Commander and her losing Gary in the breach every time. But I kinda accept this second version more, since it was a little irrational to blame Mooncake back in Season 1. He's the cutest alien ever and did nothing wrong. If he dies, it better be for a good reason. Blaming the universe itself for placing Gary and Quinn together but never letting them stay together feels much more natural for the story. And it's necessary to dedicate an entire episode to stating that even if Nightfall is a much better and more capable character than the regular Quinn, she's not the one Gary fell in love with. This episode also contains one of the best subplots of the entire show with the Mega Kevin attacking Clarence. Kevin is one of my favorite characters, and this episode has his top 3 most funny moments. Seeing the main cast fight the Mega Kevin is really entertaining, and there's some small foreshadowing about the Trivulian-Ventrexian War, and some dialogue between Fox and Little Cato. However, I don't like how this season, and this episode in particular, renders Hugh kinda useless. He was the emotional core of Season 1, and his dialogue with Gary was extremely enjoyable. And while he's still funny and I like his romance with Ava, it's a little pathetic to see him think he saved everyone while doing nothing. But still, this is a banger episode that I love rewatching. And Tribor, for the love of Bolo, stop being creepy!
I killed them. I killed them all. They're dead. Every single one of them. And not just the men, but the women. And the children, too.
For a character that's been there since the first episode, it took a long time to get the backstory of Avocado. The Ventrexian is the best backstory episode of the show. Sure, Ash's sister died, and Nightfall's Gary kept dying, but the stuff we see in this episode is on another level. Avocado was a straight-up villain, killing people in the war because he liked it. He was good at it. And when you see the King and Queen of Ventrexia on screen, it's immediately obvious that they are Little Cato's parents. But the moment where Avocado keeps him shows us that he does have compassion inside, and it retroactively makes his growing friendship with Gary in Season 1 all the more impressive. Gary is such a good friend to vibe with that he was able to let out this part of humanity in Avocado. The episode also contains some gorgeous visuals. The paintings on the walls of the church, the face of Avocado created in blood, the shot of him walking by with the ravaged wastelands in the background, the incredible fight between Bolo and Oreskes. Oh man, that's some great stuff. This episode rules.
Oh, that's right. I'm falling to my death. Guess they can't.
The Clasp is the first final space adventure.
Let's go!
And it is awesome. There's some great running gags that start in this second episode, which makes it one of the episodes I rewatch the most. Gary can't stop hurting the De Winters and they always return, and the Lord Commander always calls Gary the Gary. One of my favorite jokes of Season 1 is Hugh telling Gary that he's gonna explode if he doesn't get back to the ship, but then he reveals that he actually doesn't know how to ski. That's hysterical. This episode also sets up a lot of important things to progress the plot, like Terracon Prime as a planet, which will return in the Remembered. A throwaway joke sets up the penultimate Season 2 episode. Quinn starts her distrust of the Infinity Guard, Little Cato is introduced, Gary gets his robotic arm, Fox, watch out! And it introduces Nightfall in a subplot where she attacks the ship. Kevin is really funny in this subplot with Mooncake, and it's kinda intriguing to see Nightfall plug a key in him that will save the Galaxy 1. We'll maybe get a follow-up on that later. And I love the trope of the character that everybody finds annoying and shuts off ideas from, even though they are legitimately useful. Clarence appears and, look, he's inoffensive, just an annoying vendor that we'll never see again for sure. But the real thing that's awesome about the Clasp is the titular Clasp and bonding moments between Gary and Avocado. It's paced incredibly well, and they have a lot of funny interactions, and a lot of dramatic and heartfelt interactions as well. Yeah, this is a classic.
Here's my day so far. Went to jail, lost the girl of my dreams, and got my butt kicked pretty good. Still, things could be a lot worse. Oh, that's right. I'm falling to my death. Guess they can't. How did it all come to this, you ask? My end starts at the beginning. The very beginning.
And most scientists believe that what enters a black hole never comes out. But some think they may be a gateway to other universes.
All the Moments Lost is the most beautiful episode of Final Space animation-wise. Hands down. The red and purple lighting coming from the black hole makes for incredible looking shots. It's so cool. Story-wise, this episode is the first time I felt sad for Quinn. In Season 1, I thought the mention of her sister was just meant to make us think it was the identity of Nightfall. It actually foreshadowed this dramatic story where Quinn did everything she could to protect her sister, but couldn't stop her from wanting to be just as good as she was. But even after Avery's death, Quinn still says that she was in the 3 people she could actually trust. The last shot of the episode with the poisoning getting into her face is so powerful you just can't stop there and not watch the next episode right away. Speaking of things that follow in the next episode, Ash learns her power actually come from the Mind Stone. What? Actually come from Invictus. What? I don't really get the fans complaining about Ash's turn to the dark side being rushed. The seeds were there from the beginning. It started with Fox getting possessed, Gary making a promise to go save him after Quinn, and her feeling insecure. The moment where she fixes her broken finger herself is just badass too. Overall, this episode is both beautiful and sad, which is just the perfect combination.
We can't keep leaving people behind! We can't! You can't keep getting away with it!
And the only way to stop them is with salt. And there's no salt in the dark zone.
Okay, we're still not getting to the part where I explain the simple reasons why I hate Tribor, but in the Descent into Darkness I actually like him? What the hell? How did you make him a good character? Well, it's simple. You make his rebellion actually matter, and you let him defeat Todd himself by being actually capable at fighting. If Tribor was this awesome for the whole show, I wouldn't mind his unfunny bits. Okay, what else is in this episode? The awesome climactic confrontation between Gary and Cheryl. This fight reminded me of the final fight in Revenge of the Sith, to be honest. And no, it's not just because of the lava everywhere and the fact that Cheryl wields a lightsaber. Just like Anakin turned evil because he lost his loved ones and Palpatine promised to teach him the secret of life, Cheryl turned evil because she lost her loved one and Oreskis promised her to bring her husband back to life. Gary's speech then reminded me of BoJack Horseman, when Todd told BoJack that he can't blame his parents for his bad action, and that everything is because of him. And now, it's Cheryl who blames every bad action on her son, and Gary tells her that she can't anymore and that everything is because of her. It's like poetry, it rhymes.
And Mirabel rightfully retorts that Alma is the one who's destroying the family. And ultimately, the miracle is dying because of her.
Hugh and Ava's relationship is funny like always, even though there's no tension when they try to get the key because you obviously know that they can't just let it sink in lava if it's the only thing that can bring back Quinn. Ash, Kevin, Mooncake and Little Cadeau are also super entertaining as well. And I like the detail that Ash doesn't want anyone to call her Ashy, and yet that's the nickname Fox uses. And finally, the ending where Kevin is the one that can now drive Cheryl crazy is just the funniest thing in the world. This episode is both epic, emotional, and funny at the same time, just like most of these high-ranked episodes. This melding of tones is what the show is best at. Also, Mooncake is Kirby.
We're going back in time to the first Thanksgiving to get avocado off the menu.
The Remembered is the best time travel episode in the show. Nah, I'm just joking. Still, I don't see a lot of plot holes with this use of time travel, since it's a perfectly closed off time loop. Just like in Babylon 5, but with fewer Zatras. However, how did Gary survive for months without food or water? Oh well, I guess he can also survive massive radiations from an exploding star, so he's basically Thor. In this episode, we return to Terracon Prime. That leads to some interesting situations, since Avocado is still working with the Lord Commander. There are so many funny callbacks to Season 1, and they all work without feeling like it's too much. Also, the episode is another one where Clarence guides the other characters through a heist to steal a dimensional key. But while Clarence is still unlikable, the focus isn't on the heist specifically, it's just an excuse to get the characters to meet Avocado in the past and get the idea to save him. The confrontation with the Lord Commander is also incredible. David Tennant is still killing it, and it reminds you how much the Lord Commander was a better bad guy than what Season 2 has. The many episodic foes of Season 2 are retroactively made better by the Season 3 episode Hypertrans Dimensional Bridge Rising. But yeah, the Lord Commander is just a compelling villain from beginning to end. And speaking of compelling things, Avocado lost his memory now. That's nice because it means that his sacrifice in Season 1 still has an impact, even though the characters have saved him. This episode is better than Avengers Endgame in every way, and another contender to Freebird's epicness.
I can only do one thing, be an architect.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's finally time to rant about Tribor! Arachnitex is a top-tier half of an episode, with the other half being taken by this agonizing Tribor plotline that makes me mad. Two elements about Tribor makes him my most hated character. First, he accomplishes almost nothing in the whole show while taking too much screen time. There's a lot of episodes that needed to fill their 22 minutes, I guess, so they took half of them and give that to Tribor f***ing around and doing nothing. This episode is the perfect example of a pointless Tribor subplot. He goes to the same bar 3 times to pick up a random character each time, even though the other characters need him right now to help searching for Mooncake, and at the end, Mooncake is saved and the 3 characters separate themselves and leave the show forever. What did that accomplish? I don't care about his romance with himself, I don't care about his resistance most of the time, I don't care if he's the chosen one or not. All these plot lines take too much space away from the other characters and never factor into the main plot. If they did, then okay, but they don't. But at least they're funny plot lines, right? Well, that brings me to my second reason to dislike Tribor. He's not funny. Didn't laugh. Humor is subjective, and if you find Tribor funny, good for you. But man, it's like if Olin Rogers took his normal Gary voice and asked, "What if I tweak it so it becomes the most annoying thing ever in a show that already features Kevin?" Tribor's voice is just awful to listen to. He always whispers his lines, and when he says things like, "Why would they be twiddling their wieners? It doesn't make any sense," I just want to punch him. But at least he's a nice character that does good things, right? Right? Right?
No.
He always cares about fashion and doesn't give a shit about the people around him. In this episode, for example, when the bar guy says that he's annoyed by him always coming back to his bar for no reason, like me, he just dismisses him because he doesn't like his shirt. Thank you, show, that's how you make a character likable. When the aliens in Final Space tell Tribor that they need his help to protect themselves against an actual army, he just says, "Shut the hell up. You don't know what danger is until you've read my customer satisfaction survey."
Fuck! God damn it!
There's only 3 times where Tribor is actually useful to the show. At the end of Season 1 when he helps the team to get the bomb and helps in the space battle, in Season 2 where he neutralizes Todd, and in Season 3 when he reactivates the portal. Across 3 seasons of him being there in most episodes, he only contributes to the story 3 times. The rest of the time, I wish that Ogre was never born! Anyway, this episode is incredible outside of that. The team's quest to get Mooncake back leads to some hilarious encounters, like the returning Fraskenauer, Clarence's niece that's just no more from Ralph Breaks the Internet, the big slut that says sup.
Sup. Sup.
Sup.
Yeah, sup. Sup. Okay.
Sup.
Yeah, sup.
I am Groot.
I'm Batman.
And the good General Catalope. But after a pretty funny episode, the scene with the titular Arachnitex are on the next level. They're visually great with this space web, and the visual they use to tell their story. The story itself contains great world building, with Time BB from Gravity Falls, the Titans, Invictus, and Mooncake. And the ending with Gary and Mooncake is really emotional. These last 5 minutes have so much amazing stuff in them that I don't mind the other bad half that much, unlike something like The Happy Place that didn't wow me with anything, even in the more interesting plotline. So yeah, skip the Tribor scenes when you watch this episode in particular. They are emblematic of every problem with the character. But the rest of the episode is emblematic of every quality that Final Space as a show has. Great world building, great jokes.
Sup.
Yeah, what's that?
Great new characters, great emotion, and great visuals.
Tribor, look me in the eye. Now shut up.
Lois Lane! She's the key!
The 6th key is the weakest season finale out of the 3. But come on, it's not in the top 10 for nothing. Nightfall's sacrifice isn't as good as Avocado's sacrifice back in Season 1, but still really works for this season. In Season 1 she kinda came and went and only helped the team when it was convenient to the plot. But in Season 2, making her a core member of the group that eventually sacrifices herself is perfect. The plotline involving the fight with Avocado on Bolo's Cube while Mooncake activates all the key is epic as hell. But meanwhile, the plotline about Fox, Hugh, and Tribor giving Cheryl a redemption arc is pretty well done as well. Obviously, Tribor is unfunny, and also genuinely harmful to the progress of the team by liberating Cheryl at the beginning of the episode.
You dense, irritating miniature beast of burden!
But Cheryl's redemption is given all the time it really needed in my opinion. Yes, it's weird for the other characters to immediately accept her in the team without questions right after the season ends, but her own development makes sense at least. That's pretty much it. This is a great climactic episode for the rather slow Season 2. It really took the pace back up near the end.
Kevin.
Supernova is an awesome Season 1 episode. But top 10 awesome, you might ask? Well, in my opinion, John Goodspeed is one of the core emotional strengths of the first season. His story, the original mooncake, and the explosion are such compelling elements of backstory for Gary that I just kept pushing the episode higher and higher in my ranking the longer I thought about it. Visually, it's not as good looking as All the Moments Lost and, well, every single episode above it, but it's still incredible. The scene where Gary flies into space with Mooncake, Kevin going into the core to plug the key, the star, and the white void full of memories, it's all beautiful stuff. It makes me appreciate the fact that Final Space opted for a colorful space rather than a cold, dark, lonely black space. I am a fan of Kevin, and seeing him actually be useful, even when the other characters ignore him, always makes me happy. This episode has one of his best moments, and I didn't think that they would pay off the key Nightfall placed in him so soon on my first viewing. But it's great. The Sames are a much better antagonistic force than the zombie Garys from Season 3, don't at me. This episode is the best way they could have added Quinn into the story. The reveal that Quinn never got to see Gary's videos is legitimately sad, as he spent 5 years alone making them. The destroyed ship with the tapes of Mooncake's origin is an interesting thread, but the real incredible part of this episode is the scenes of Gary in the Caterpillar. I guess he can survive critical amounts of radiation and be totally fine, whatever. It's simply hard for Gary to be forced into watching his dad die again. This episode is totally underrated. I love it.
Maybe just this once. I also killed a man.
Hello Gary is the first episode of the show. And what is the first thing you see in the whole show? Not a big epic space battle, not funny alien creatures doing wacky shenanigans, just 2 piano notes, destroyed ships, and Gary, alone in space, talking to an AI.
The outcome was never in our favor, Gary.
Cut it to me straight, Hugh. What are my chances of getting out of this mess?
In your current state, you will pass the point of recovery in 10 minutes. You are also leaking O2, Gary.
I adored the episode openers for Season 1, and this first one sets the tone perfectly. Then, we see Gary waking up and talking to an AI, alone in space on the Galaxy 1. This contrasts so well, it's incredible. The story ends in the same way it begins, and we've already seen both. Okay, I'm not going into details on each scene, but this episode is the perfect introduction to the show. Yes, I agree that Gary is a little crazy. He screams a lot and it's a little annoying. But come on, this man was trapped for 5 years with a bunch of robots. I can accept that it made him crazier than he already was. And it makes his character arc through the series really impressive. You can tell that he's maturing over the course of the story. This episode shows us this world, the characters, the overall tone of the show, but it never feels like overkill because the humor is there to balance things out. Yeah, Gary's annoying, but if he wasn't, it wouldn't be the same. Also, I actually really like Gary's voice. Holden, you did a good job, it isn't as annoying as Tribor or Biscuit. As an episode, Hello Gary is flawed, but as the first episode, it's awesome. Also, this is the spot on the list where I would rank the original pilot as well. It's so great, I understand how it managed to wow the different companies that wanted the show. It's 7 minutes long, and like most pilots, it's not 100% accurate to the show, but I consider it canon anyway because the original Gary resets the timeline so the show could happen. I really encourage you to go on Holland's channel and give the pilot a watch, because it's always cool to see where everything started.
An artifact of great power, a pinhole-sized breach into the Darklands.
The closer you get is incredible. I said that every episode of the top 10 just gets better and better in the visual department, and oh yeah, that's true. I obviously don't like the Clarence part and the Tribor part of this episode, but when everything else is that great, I don't care about them. The place where Gary goes is hellish and unnerving. Phil is funny, I like him. Invictus was mentioned many times before this, but this is the point where we're really shown his true power. Avocado having memory-related problems in this episode eventually gets resolved, but then he immediately gets possessed by Invictus. That's insane. The writers really make his return have a cost, and I like that it takes the entire season 2 before he can fully return to his old self. But I think this gives him a little bit of plot armor going forward, since Holland can't kill Avocado again after he died once and we spent an entire season getting him back. Him having a second death in the graphic novel would just be too much, so I'm convinced that he will survive, unlike basically everyone else. The climax of this episode is an intense battle where Gary gets really wounded. Of course, this episode would be even better if it wasn't immediately followed by The Lost Spy, the worst episode of the show, but this ending still shatters me as we see Lil Cado on his knees in the same pose he made after his father died back in season 1. Since now both his fathers are gone after he spent the whole episode bickering with them, and now he regrets it. Across 3 seasons of him being there in most episodes, he only contributes to the story 3 times.
Anyways, I was holed up in an abandoned uprising transmitting tower when I intercepted a signal on an old Infinity Guard channel. Well, my dude Farouk intercepted it. You guys would like him, he's funny, but not in your face about it. A natural funny.
Get on with it!
Anyways, check it out.
It's Quinn. Can anybody hear me?
Wait a minute, is that useful? Tribor, did you just did something productive? Wow!
Wait.
I mean, no, hahaha, you're so annoying.
I mean, I think about how it ends all the time. All the time. At least once a day.
The Devil's Den. Oof, this episode hits hard. This was never intended to be the series finale of the show, but now it is. I'm really conflicted as to whether I should judge this episode as a season finale or as is. Because as a season finale, it stays number 6. After watching this episode, you just can't wait for the 4th season to see our heroes beat Invictus whatever the way. Ash is a powerful, intimidating villain, and the squad will pretty much need to turn her good again if they want even a slight chance of winning. Ash kills Mooncake in this episode. Yeah, you heard me right, the marketable, cute, and lovable sidekick gets Game of Thrones. This episode is just so brave to just end the season on such a bleak note. Season 2 kinda disappointed me in that regard, since Season 1's ending led me to believe that each season would have a sad or bittersweet finale. In Season 2, the good guys win and we get teased with Invictus as the next big bad. That's fine, but compared with Gary literally dying, that's relatively tamed. But then Season 3 comes along and says, let me do the same thing as Season 2, but for real. Instead of Invictus smiling in the background waiting for his turn, this time he's unleashed upon the universe and takes his real form. A dark purple demon corrupting everything. The song they used fits perfectly to create a sense of dread for what will follow. They ran, but fate caught up to them. And how many squad mates we love will die fighting back in the next season? As a season finale, this is legendary. But as the end of the whole show, it's even better. Don't get me wrong, I'm beyond happy that we can get the intended ending for the show in the form of the comic book. But it's so morbidly satisfying to have the show end in the same way it began, with Gary in a hopeless situation. This time, however, he dragged all his friends with him, and his final line sums up the whole situation as all their combined mistakes coming back for them. This is such a sad ending for this story that I love it. I always enjoy happy endings in media, but I like it even more when something has the heroes failing, while you know that eventually they can succeed. Having a dropped cliffhanger is bad, obviously, but if you actually follow it up, then I'll still look fondly on that original ending, since for once the bad guy got a chance to win. That's why Infinity War is my favorite MCU movie, since I know that the Avengers will eventually win in Endgame, but seeing Thanos rest and watch the sun rise on a grateful universe makes me think, good for him. And yeah, good job Invictus, your plan was on the same level as Emperor Palpatine, and it actually worked, even though another generation might defeat you later. Keep in mind, even if the show stayed cancelled, or if the graphic novel eventually also has a sad ending, which is unlikely, I'll still love this episode, because I don't need to specifically see the characters winning. I can imagine it myself. When anything ends, you as a viewer are always free to reflect about how the story continues moving forward. It's rewarding to come up with ways for any situation to flip on its head. Right now, I have 100 theories about how they will beat Invictus, but I think I'll keep them to myself. Fighting Back is the best season finale. Take everything I said about the sad ending of Season 3, but apply it to something that was even more built up. Season 3 had Gary and the rest of the gang ignoring Bolo and the Arachnitect's advice, choosing to stay in final space, etc. All of these things inevitably led to their defeat, but in the moment we can't see exactly what those moments are setting up. But back in Season 1, we knew exactly how the story would end. The intro to each episode was a constant reminder that Gary will end up alone, with a number of minutes to live growing smaller and smaller. This builded so much tension because you just wondered if the other characters would live, or get lost, or leave, or become evil. But in your head you can still hope that the last minute Deus Ex Machina will save Gary when he reaches, well, 1 minute, and they will stop the Lord Commander. Because this hopeless situation cannot be final, right? Well, when you get to this episode, you realize that it is. The first season ends with Gary dying, just like we were promised in the very first episode. But still, like I said with Season 3, there is still a possibility to imagine, to think of ways that would allow Gary to come back. Gary's last conversation with his dad and the beam of white light that reaches Gary is perfect to leave us thinking. Obviously, all of this good stuff that I just explained is completely invalidated by the next episode, the Toro Regatta, which ruins everything by having the beam be only a garbage collector that magically makes Gary come back. This is one of the reasons why I initially thought Season 2 wasn't worth watching. It's because I didn't see it as a continuation that made sense for that ending. Reverting it immediately is a bad choice in my book, I'm sorry. Still, if you take away the excellent ending, is this episode still worth putting in number 5? Yeah. The space battles are completely epic, everyone has something to do, Tribor is unfunny but at least he's useful, so I'm not complaining, Quinn's sacrifice is great and has a ton of consequences, Gary's speech at the beginning is awesome,
But to me, we become like a close but very strange family.
Kevin is destroyed for good, which, I don't like it personally, but Gary likes it, so it's okay, and Hugh has an incredible send-off.
I'll miss you, friend.
I miss you, friend.
And it's like, fuck, man, we know what's coming. The build-up here is even more heartbreaking than it was in Jedi Fallen Order.
Father and Son is the episode that can make me confirm that Avocado is my favorite character of the show. Yeah, I jokingly said that it was Kevin multiple times, and he's still my number 2, but Avocado is complex, funny, sad, and the second best bro ever, after Garrus from Mass Effect. This episode is always building up the friendship between Gary and Avocado. Gary chooses to help him find his son over saving the Earth with his love interest. He completely accepts Avocado's evil backstory, and he bro fists with him as the light speed effect starts. This scene is absolutely iconic. The fact that they know from the beginning that they are walking into a trap is a really fun subversion, and everything happening in the prison is supremely entertaining. Meanwhile, the Quinn subplot is great for 2 reasons. First, we get development for Quinn, but also mostly Gary, as we see him persevere with all of his videos. This half of this episode being dedicated to Gary is really important as the other half focuses on Avocado, and so we get both halves of their duo in the same episode. Second, Kevin is funny!
Should I kill Gary? What? It's going down! It is going downtown, yo!
And when I first watched the episode, you know what I thought? That nothing could make Gary and Avocado's friendship stronger than Gary helping him mourn the death of his son. I really thought that Lil Cado would die. Up to this point, Lil Cado didn't have that much compelling characterization. He fell into a trap and was currently possessed by the Lord Commander. In my eyes, he was always supposed to be a plot device for Avocado's development. When the Lord Commander put a bomb on Lil Cado, I was like, I knew it! And Avocado's line about being excited for the future strengthened further my theory that he would never get said future with his son if Lil Cado dies. But then, my expectations were subverted. This ending is so effective that if I had put this episode at number 1 and told you it was because of the ending without any explanation, nobody would have questioned me. I mean, the second main character who appears in the opening credits frickin' dies! What's happening in this funny Kevin show anymore?
Okay guys, in order to save our uncle, we're gonna have to follow that dream demon into his mind.
Let me tell you a quick anecdote. On Netflix, season 1 episodes didn't have titles, so I created my own. I took the challenge of summarizing every episode in one word. Most of my titles were terrible, like Prison for episode 1 for example, but some were pretty good. Even if the other seasons had real titles, I continued doing it for fun. I would just take the most important element of each episode and make it the title of the episode. For the Chamber of Doubt, I chose Cookie. I think it's incredible to start the episode with the characters meeting up near the cookie distributor with a conversation full of doubt, and end the episode with you asking Gary if he wants a cookie again to cheer him up. And then this happens. This scene is the best scene of season 3. In season 1, cookies were funny. Gary was obsessed with them, and this obsession was almost always turned into a joke. And to the people complaining that Gary never develops, look at this scene and tell me what you see. This is a man that's changed. In my head, this episode will always be named Cookie because of what it represents. But The Chamber of Doubt is still a great title. This episode brings back the flaming Eminem, who's one of my favorite side characters ever. He's so funny! Bowl's mind has changed a lot since season 1, but they kept this great side character and I'm happy about that. This episode is weirdly paced, with the characters searching for the spark of sanity in Bowl's head, while we know that Ash already found it. That seems a little odd. We already knew that Invictus had Fox under his control, so that explains why we see him in Bowl's mind, which is also under Invictus's control at the moment. He doesn't seem evil, he's just telling us about his tragic backstory. The flashback scene is heartbreaking, even sadder than the backstory of Avocado 4 episodes prior. But after learning Fox's story, we see it's actually Invictus, and Gary and the team find the real spark of sanity. That's not good. Some people think that Fox's story isn't true because Invictus uses it to trick Ash. But like, it needs to be true if he wants Ash to trust him. She already knows the story. Up to this point, Invictus didn't really lie to her. And when Gary arrives, you know that Invictus wants Gary to kill Fox so that what he told Ash can happen. But there's no way Gary would murder a member of his squad, right? Oh, he's forced to. And this scene parallels the scene where Fox was forced to lie down as they cut his arm by having Gary pinned down while his arm does what we have been dreading. You remember how I didn't see Avocado's death coming at all? Well, it's the same thing with Fox. I never thought that the show would actually kill him. I always saw Fox as a really funny and likable character, but one that felt unnecessary since we already had Kevin and Hugh as comic relief characters. And also Tribor, but I don't think he's funny. And also Biscuit, who is introduced in this season. And the show being so focused on jokes in season 2 made me think that they would never remove even one comic relief. But this episode confirmed that yes, the show was doing what it needed to do, and I was happy about that. Yes, I also was sad that Fox died, but it felt so satisfying, especially with the following cookie scene, that I think this episode deserves to be as high as it is on my ranking.
I got friends on the other side.
The Other Side is my second favorite episode of Final Space, and the real best time travel episode of the show. Because it isn't really a time travel episode, The time shards don't do the same thing as the time worms we see in the pilot and the Remembered, as they split the ship in two halves, with one of them making time pass at a ridiculously high pace. The name I gave this episode on my first viewing is Logins, because when this episode starts, it doesn't seem like a super serious situation. Gary is stealing Star-Lord's characterization by putting Footloose on the ship and everybody dances. They're vibing. But then, we get suddenly interrupted by huge time shards in their path. Lil Cato tries to avoid them, but he hits one and we see Gary falling into the other side. After the intro, we get the Avengers Endgame blip. But it's not just 5 years, oh no. 60 freaking years have passed with the characters trapped there except Gary. This is unsettling. Clarence, Tribor and Kevin are going crazy, Nightfall is blind, Lil Cato is sad, Fox and Ash aren't there, and Mooncake has a voice. All of these are horrifying. In most shows, like in The Flash Season 3 for example, if you tell us about a terrible future that the characters desperately need to prevent, and you show how sad things turn out to be for the characters and how tragic the situation is, the audience will stop caring. Because we're not stupid. There are 6 more seasons of this shit. Nothing can go wrong. And it's the same thing here. We are only 4 episodes into season 2 out of 3. The status quo needs to return by the end of the episode, so why should we care? Watching this, I hope that there would be at least psychological consequences for the characters that spent 60 years trapped on a ship. But seeing as the first 3 episodes of this season were happy, jokey, episodic adventures, I expected this episode to be another pointless one. We eventually see that Lil Cato wants to send a message for help, and that Gary, Fox and Ash are safe on the other side. So yeah, it kinda confirmed what I was suspecting. Still, we saw some sad moments of Lil Cato using an AI of his dad to beat himself up, so that was some interesting characterization. Lil Cato seemed to be the only one that gained some depth thanks to this plotline, and now we're going to return to normal. But then, a freaking Titans attack the ship. This is kinda cool actually, since we heard about Titans before but never saw one in action. But when it gets defeated, I thought that it would really mess with the stakes later if they want to make the Titans dangerous, since Lil Cato was able to arm it with a normal gun. Then Lil Cato dies, which wasn't built up at all and wasn't what I expected based on the fact that he doubted himself in this episode. You're just gonna kill him now? That's not very satisfying. Then Tribor ruins the emotion of the death with a terrible joke. Cool. I just felt like the writers were trying to redo Avocado's death, but really missing the point of what made it work. But then the episode all clicked together thanks to one simple reveal. It was all fake. The Titan being weak, Lil Cato dying, and the other characters being even there. It was all in Lil Cato's head. He spent 60 years all alone. Oh. Finally, I understood the purpose of this story. And when the episode wrapped up, I almost cried. It was just too good. I need to say that the only times I ever cried watching animated shows were with the ending of the Clone Wars and 2 different episodes of BoJack Horseman. I'm hard to break, but this episode almost did. It reminded me of another BoJack episode that I found incredibly sad, named Ruthie. In this episode, we see the daughter of Princess Carolyn from the future telling us how she beat the odds and came out victorious against life's hardships. But we learn at the end that it's just a fantasy she made up in her head to make her feel better. The other side is even better than Ruthie, because you've already seen in this show how spending 5 years with only robots can drive you crazy. But Lil Cato had to spend 60 entirely alone, except for an AI that makes him taunt himself. When Lil Cato comes back, he doesn't want to talk, but we can feel in every following episode this new edge that means he's matured with this experience. And the ending tells us that he stopped beating himself up, thanks to these years of solitude making him appreciate the friends he has right now. Lil Cato had a kinda sad past in season 1, with him being used by the Lord Commander to test Avocado, and he eventually gained an even sadder background in season 3 with the whole King and Queen stuff. But this episode felt like the tragic backstory of Lil Cato happened before our eyes, and it's incredible. I don't mind Tribor and Clarence being annoying here, because it means that Lil Cato also finds them annoying in his head. The humor is pretty funny, and outside of Tribor at the end, it never detracts from the emotion of the story. Unlike something like Not What He Seems in Gravity Falls. The Other Side was extremely close to being my favorite episode of Final Space, but I think there's one that I like a little bit more. Enter Bolo is my favorite episode of Final Space. You remember what I said about all the elements that make Final Space great? Because unlike in Arachnitex, where they're all there in only a half of the episode, this episode has all these elements throughout all the episode. There isn't any part that I dislike. This episode shows us some great world building by introducing the Titans, the origin of Mooncake, the real mission of Gary's dad, and where the Lord Commander's power come from. The little bit of time travel is also a closed-off time loop that already happened anyway, so it doesn't cause any problems. The jokes are extremely funny, the ones with Kevin, the ones with Gary's dad. Gary himself is starting to really mature, so that makes him funnier since you're less concentrated on his annoyingness. All the different versions of Gary, and especially Mustache Gary, are the funniest thing ever, especially for me since I love mustaches. And I love how they keep hammering the joke in even when it's worn off. In any other situation that would start to be unfunny, but come on! It also shows Gary's insecurities through not having a mustache, and Olin does a voice that isn't annoying like his Tribor voice.
Oh, it feels so good!
And oh yeah, can we talk about the fact that Tribor isn't in this episode? Hallelujah! The characters introduced in this episode are awesome. Bolo, voiced by Kate David, is both funny and mysterious, and the Flaming M&M has such great comedic timing and delivery that he entertains me to the max. But the stuff with Nightfall's sadness, and especially Gary's dad John Goodspeed, is really emotional. I love how he's just so calm even though he's about to die, and when Gary tells him about universe saving and time travel. He's already gone through similar stories and will just finish his job. But at the same time, he has fun with his son by beaming up the Lord Commander together, and supports him about his love plotline, which shows how much he cares about him. And finally, Gary needs to watch his father die for the third time, but this time it's much closer to him, and he can actually speak to his dad, tell him not to sacrifice himself. But yeah, this needs to happen since it already happened. So Gary asks his dad a last question. What if he can't do it? What if he can't save the Earth? His dad answers, try your best, which is already incredibly powerful. But Gary then asks, what if my best isn't good enough? To which John Goodspeed's answers, it's good enough for me. We already know that Gary will ultimately fail in his mission, but this line can still give us hope. The visuals in this scene and the whole episode are phenomenal. Nightfall's story, the sun, the brain chambers, which remind me of Star Wars The Clone Wars, the big black shard contrasting with the white void, and John flying into the breach as some fitting music plays in the background. I didn't really talk about it in this video, but the music in this show is fantastic. I often listen to the OST on YouTube, because these tracks fit so well with the show and outside of it, that it's an element that is always on point in every episode. Enter Bolo is just the complete package. Final Space is such a special show, and this episode knows it. I don't know if it's the best of the whole show, since The Other Side, The Chamber of Doubts, and Arachnitex had some individual parts that were better. But this episode is so consistent with the plot, the humor, the Kevin, everything, that it makes it my favorite episode of Final Space. So yeah, that was my list. Feel free to disagree with me. This is my first video of this style and length, so I made mistakes for sure. I am also from Quebec, so tell me if my accent or my pronunciation or my syntax had problems. Share all of your opinions in the comments. I don't care about the YouTube algorithm, I just want to communicate with other fans of this show. Olin, I trust you with this ending, and I can't wait until 2024 to read it for myself. I'm extremely excited to see the whole team return for one last ride into the forever and beautiful sky. Except Tribor, he can go burn in hell.
Is this peach? Because it better not be fuchsia.
Peaches, 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 peaches. End of the line.
Back in the 90s, I was in a very famous tea.